The night is quiet over the Bosphorus, but the water remembers. It remembers the splashes that weren't made by waves, but by heavy sacks sinking fast, each one holding a woman whose life was stolen before dawn. They were not criminals. They were not enemies. They were daughters, sisters, mothers, erased because one man's fear became their death sentence. Centuries later, the palace walls are silent, but the truth has not drowned. The river still carries their whispers, begging to be heard. Tonight we open the pages history tried to close, to tell the story they never lived to finish. The night is dark and quiet over the Bosphorus Strait. The moonlight shines faintly on the water, making it look like silver glass. Suddenly, a sound breaks the silence. It is not the sound of waves or boats. It is heavy sacks hitting the water, one after another. Each splash is a life disappearing into the depths. Inside those sacks are women, still alive only moments before, now sinking slowly under the cold current. No one speaks, no one shouts. Only muffled cries escape the cloth before the water swallows them whole. This is not nature. This is not an accident. It is human cruelty, carried out in silence, with no mercy and no justice. Hundreds of women vanish this night, their names and faces erased as if they never existed. But the truth did not sink with their bodies. It waited, hidden in history, for someone to listen. To understand what happened, to see why fear ruled stronger than love, we must step back in time. We must enter the palace of the Sultan on the day when suspicion became law and power turned into a massacre. This is where the forgotten story begins, in a place where life was fragile and death was only a command away. In the mid-17th century, inside the palace of Sultan Ibrahim, fear was more powerful than reason. Ibrahim was not known for wisdom or kindness. He was known for sudden rages, strange behavior, and dangerous paranoia. One day, a rumor reached his ears. One of his many concubines might have been unfaithful. No one could say who it was, no proof, no evidence. But for the Sultan, this was enough. In his mind, betrayal lived in every corner of the harem. Suspicion became truth, and truth became a death sentence for hundreds of innocent women. His command was quick and final. All 280 women in his harem must die before sunrise. Royal gardeners were called, not to tend flowers, but to prepare sacks and stones. Executioners moved silently through the palace corridors, waking the women one by one. They were bound, sewn alive into heavy sacks with rocks tied to their feet. There were no trials, no last words, only terror as they were marched under guard to the dark shores of the Bosphorus. One by one, the women were thrown into the water. The splashes echoed under the night sky. Their cries were muffled by fabric, cut short as the river swallowed them whole. No prayers were said, no records of their names were kept. To the Sultan they were no longer people, just a problem erased by drowning. But fate allowed one woman to escape. She clawed and tore through the sack while underwater, fighting for air. Her body surfaced near a French merchant ship anchored nearby. The sailors pulled her aboard and heard her story of horror and madness. Word spread quickly through diplomatic channels. Reports of this massacre shocked European courts, painting Ibrahim as a ruler who treated human lives as disposable objects. The world outside the palace could not believe such a thing was possible, yet it was written in eyewitness accounts and carried in whispers by terrified survivors. Hundreds of lives had ended in silence, while one lone voice cried out to foreign strangers for help. Europe was horrified, yet within the palace walls, this wasn't seen as chaos or tragedy. It was seen as order restored. It was procedure, a way of control, part of a system that made death a normal tool of power and fear. Life inside the Sultan's palace was built on fear. From the outside, the harem seemed like a place of luxury and privilege, where hundreds of women lived surrounded by gold, silk, and fine music. But behind the decorated walls, it was a cage where power and death walked hand in hand. The harem had a strict hierarchy. At the top were favored wives and mothers of princes, women who had the Sultan's attention or bore his children. Beneath them were concubines, hoping to rise but knowing one wrong move, or even a rumor, could mean execution. At the very bottom were new arrivals, stripped of their names, families, and freedom, unsure if they would live long enough to be noticed. The Sultan's power over these women was absolute. Ottoman law already allowed a ruler to kill his brothers to secure the throne, a rule called the law of fratricide. Over time, this same idea was extended to women in the harem. Their lives depended on the Sultan's comfort and survival. If he felt threatened, disrespected, or even slightly displeased, he could order any woman killed. No one could question him. No court could stop him. Death was not a punishment for crimes. It was a tool to keep fear alive and obedience certain. This fear became part of daily life. When a new sultan came to power, he inherited the harem of his predecessor, dozens or even hundreds of women. But new rulers often wanted a fresh start, free from any ties to the past. So they ordered mass executions of these women, drowning them in the Bosphorus to make room for new concubines. Palace records describe these killings as routine housekeeping, as casually as one might describe cleaning a room or replacing furniture. Lives were measured not in love or companionship, but in usefulness to one man's desires. Every woman in the harem knew she was replaceable. She could be given gifts and attention one night, then vanish the next, her body thrown into the dark waters without ceremony. The threat was constant, and that threat was the Sultan's greatest weapon. Fear ruled stronger than laws, stronger than faith, stronger even than hope. It shaped how women walked, spoke, or even breathed in the Sultan's presence. Silence was safety. Obedience was survival. But the cruelty of this system did not stop at nameless masses. It reached into individual lives, breaking hearts and ending futures with cold precision. Each woman carried the weight of this terror differently, yet none could escape it. Some tried to stay invisible, others prayed for mercy, but even innocence offered no shield. Death could come for any reason or for no reason at all. But brutality wasn't only systemic, it was personal, etched into the fate of individual women like Zafia Hatun, whose only crime was becoming a mother in a place where motherhood could mean death. Zafia Hatun entered the palace as many women did, taken from her home, given a new name, and placed in the Sultan's harem. She had no choice in where she lived, who she served, or how her life would unfold. But like every woman there, she dreamed of survival, maybe even a small piece of happiness in a place ruled by fear. That fragile hope ended the moment she became pregnant. In the harem, not every woman was allowed to bear royal children. Only those chosen by strict rules of rank and permission could carry the Sultan's heirs. Zafia's pregnancy broke those rules, even though the child's father was a royal prince. To the outside world, such news would mean joy, a new life on the way. Inside the palace it meant death. The child was seen not as a blessing but as a threat to order and power. The decision came swiftly from one of the most powerful figures in the empire, Ottoman Sultan, the Sultan's own mother. She ordered that both Zafia and her unborn child be drowned. At first, the chief eunuch hesitated, shocked at the command. But Ottoman's word carried the weight of law. Soon after, Zafia was bound and sewn alive into a heavy sack. Without a trial, without a chance to speak or beg for mercy, she was thrown into the cold waters of the Bosphorus, sinking with a life inside her that never had a chance to see the world. What makes this tragedy even more chilling is how it was remembered. There was no mourning, no prayers, no songs for Zafia or her baby. The palace scribes wrote the event into their ledgers as if they were recording a purchase or tax payment. A few words on a piece of paper turned a living woman and an unborn child into a line item in the palace's routine business of death. It was just another task completed, another problem removed, another shadow swallowed by water. Her story wasn't unique. The palace ledger fills with names, each line a life erased, each execution another lesson in terror for those left alive. Gulfam Kaidan's story shows how fragile life was inside the Sultan's palace, where even whispers could kill. She was one of the many women in the harem, living under constant rules and silent fear. One evening, a rumor began to spread. People whispered that Gulfam had sold her turn to spend the night with the Sultan to another concubine. There was no proof, no witness, only gossip carried from one fearful servant to another. Yet in the harem, an accusation did not need truth to destroy a life. When the rumor reached the Sultan, his rage was instant. He saw it not just as disobedience but as an insult to his power and pride. He did not ask questions, he did not seek evidence. He simply commanded that Gulfam be executed immediately. The chief black eunuch delivered the order. 2 mute executioners, men chosen because they could never speak of what they saw, came to carry out the task. Gulfam was taken to a quiet chamber where silk cords waited. Without trial or defense, she was strangled slowly until she stopped breathing. Her body was removed in silence, erased from the palace as if she had never lived there at all. Days later the truth emerged. The rumor had been false, a cruel lie whispered by someone else in the harem. Gulfam had done nothing wrong. But by then, nothing could undo her death. The Sultan was overcome by grief and guilt, yet his sorrow only created more suffering. In his anger at being misled, he ordered the mute executioners, the very men who had obeyed his command, to be killed. Their deaths were meant to wash away his regret, but it only added more blood to the palace floors. This pattern repeated itself many times in Ottoman palace history. A single word, a rumor, a passing glance at another man could turn a woman into a target. The system allowed the Sultan's emotions to become law, making executions quick, unquestionable, and permanent. Innocence offered no safety. Every decision was final, and every mistake was paid for with lives. Regret came too late, and even then, it birthed only more death. Over time, this wasn't madness. It became machinery, a smooth and silent process that turned fear into obedience and life into something that could be ended with a single word. Inside the Sultan's palace, death was not chaotic or random. It was organized, efficient, and carried out like a daily task. There were men whose entire purpose in life was to kill on command. They were called the mute executioners, chosen as boys and made unable to speak, ensuring that no one could ever hear or repeat the palace's secrets. They moved like shadows through the halls, responding only to orders, their silence making every step more terrifying. The methods were designed to look clean and controlled. Strangulation with silk cords was preferred because it left no bloodstains on the palace carpets. 2 men would hold the cord from behind, pulling slowly until the victim stopped breathing. It was not fast. It was not merciful. It was meant to remind everyone watching that the Sultan's will could end life as easily as snuffing out a candle. After the killings, the execution fountain in the palace courtyard was where executioners washed their hands and the cords, right in public view. Everyone who passed it was reminded that death was part of palace life, as normal as eating or praying. Records of every execution were written down in ledgers, next to notes on food expenses and military supplies. Lives ended were counted and recorded like objects, not people. Some executions were made public inside the harem. Women would be forced to watch as a friend or rival was strangled, a warning of what could happen to them next. Even worse, some victims were made to participate in their own end. Palace officials would demand they confess to crimes they never committed and thank the Sultan for his mercy in giving them a quick death. Fear and control were the true goals, not justice or truth. There was no escape. Death could come quietly in the night or be displayed as a lesson during the day. Either way, the palace made sure every woman understood. Her life was not hers to keep. It belonged to the Sultan's mood, his suspicions, or the system built to protect his absolute power. These killings weren't just physical. They carved scars deep into the minds of those who survived, turning life itself into a form of imprisonment. Life inside the harem was not only dangerous because of executions. It was a slow and constant breaking of the human spirit. Women arrived young, many taken from their homes by force or sold by desperate families. The first thing the palace did was strip away their identity. Their birth names were erased and replaced with Turkish ones. Their native languages were forbidden, and they were punished if they spoke to anyone in words the palace could not understand. Every reminder of their past life, family, friends, faith, and culture, was taken away until they were only what the Sultan allowed them to be. Isolation was another tool of control. New women were often locked alone for weeks, unsure of their fate, waiting to learn the rules of survival. They were watched constantly by guards and older concubines who reported every mistake. Fear turned women against each other. Small privileges like better food or safer sleeping quarters were given to those who spied on others. Betrayal became a way to stay alive, and trust was almost impossible. Even friendships carried risk because losing a friend to execution meant you might be next. For the women inside, life felt like being a ghost, alive but invisible, forced to move quietly, think silently, and leave no trace that might anger someone with power. Outside the palace, families lived in dread, knowing daughters who were taken to the harem might never return, or if they did, they might be broken by what they had endured. Some families were afraid to even speak of the palace for fear of punishment or losing more loved ones. The trauma did not end with these women. It carried forward into generations, shaping how families raised their daughters, with warnings to stay quiet, obedient, unnoticed. Fear of power, fear of men, fear of speaking the truth became lessons passed down, long after the palace walls themselves fell silent. The Bosphorus carried away thousands of bodies, but it also carried away pieces of souls that were never recovered. The water became a graveyard for voices that were never heard and stories never told. Centuries later, history tries to forget what the Bosphorus remembers. Thousands of lives swallowed, thousands of truths erased. The passage of time has buried much of what happened inside the Sultan's palace. Many records were destroyed or altered to protect the image of the empire. Graves were never marked, bodies lost to the Bosphorus left no trace, and the names of most victims were erased from history. Families who lost daughters to the palace rarely spoke of it, fearing punishment or simply carrying too much grief to put it into words. Whole bloodlines were broken, their future generations stolen before they could even be born. Only fragments of the truth remain today. Letters from foreign ambassadors, rare testimonies from women who escaped, and a few official records that somehow survived centuries of silence. Historians must piece together these horrors like broken glass, knowing they will never see the full picture. The voices of thousands are missing, and what is left feels like an echo of something far greater and darker than we can fully imagine. The palace may have succeeded in hiding many of its crimes, but the weight of its cruelty has never truly vanished. And yet, the water still whispers their names, demanding remembrance. These women were real. They laughed, cried, dreamed, and hoped just like anyone else. Yet their lives were stolen, their voices silenced, and their names washed away in the dark waters of the Bosphorus. They were more than victims. They were human beings who deserved love, safety, and dignity. Their stories matter, even centuries later, because forgetting them means letting cruelty win again. If you believe truths like these should never vanish, if you believe forgotten voices deserve to be heard, help us tell their stories. Share them, remember them, and keep their memory alive for the world to see.